Remove the battery tray and the left side panel. First you're going to do is cut this tie that holds the motor wires to the chassis. Once you do that, you can pull the motor wires up. And there's the motor wires. To separate these is what I've done. So I take a razor knife and I cut right in the middle of the connector. And I make sure I cut all the way around real good. Cut all four sides and the corners. And then pull the connector apart. Do that on all three connectors. Do the same thing. Cut all the way around. And pull it apart. Then do the third one. Same thing, cut all the way around. This one's already cut. And pull it apart. Then, over on this side, remove the 4 bolts holding the module in. This is the Hall sensor connector. You push this tab down and pull it off. You won't be reusing this connector at all. You can tape it off or just tie it off to the harness. On the mower harness, here's the little locking tab. Instead of pushing it, you got to push it upwards. You got to pull it upwards to release the connector. The first time this connector comes apart, it's going to be very hard because it's sealed in there. So be wary. And then you have your black and red connectors. You do the same thing. You cut the insulation or the heat shrink right in the middle, all the way around, and then pull them off. That gets your module loose. Once the module's out, you're going to want to get a big pair of cutters and cut all the big cables off. Cut them down here and cut each cable off. Because you're going to reuse these cables. You're going to reuse these 5 cables. And then also, this big connector, you're also going to cut it off here because you're going to be reusing this connector. And that's the module removal. Okay, I've already done some prep work. I've pre-stripped the wires. You can see here, here, here. The stripping on the large wires will go exactly halfway in to the connectors. On the small wires, they're going to go in further. Actually, the wire is going to come to the very end of the connector. So when the wires get crimped, the small wires get crimped in, you're actually going to be on one side crimping the insulation also. On the other side, the wire will be matched up with the wire here, so they'll be overlapping in the crimped connector. The first step is to crimp the connector onto the small wire. So I've got my extra heavy duty crimpers here, and it does have a setting for the smallest crimps. So it'll be in there like that. If you can see that. And then say the red wire here, we'll do it first. Make sure all the strands are in there. And then when you see the wire just popping out the other side is when you crimp it down. Always test to make sure you got a good tight fit. This one's good. Make sure your heat shrink will actually fit over your tube. Yeah, this is a kind of a snug fit, but it fits. But that way when you shrink it down onto the red one, it'll have a good seal. Make sure the heat shrink is on. I like to put the heat shrink on all the wires before I get started. On some of my wires, they're kind of short, so I put the heat shrink on the other side. It doesn't really matter, just as long as you have one on each wire. That's a big priority. Otherwise, you're going to have to take things apart to get the heat shrink on there. So remember to put the heat shrink on. Okay. The second step. Again, get the tool centered up in just the right location. This is my red wire. Red's all the way in there. Crimp it down. And that's one wire. It's not pulling apart. You can leave it that way and do all the shrinks at the same time. That's what I normally do. Now it's time to crimp the other three wires. So now we slide the shrink wrap on each one of the splices and get it centered up. I've got one of these little butane torches I use, but it really, I could use something a little smaller because it almost gets too hot. But when you're shrink wrapping, these tiny wires always start from the big end and work towards the tiny side, because that way you don't melt the insulation on the tiny wire. So just take your time and use as little heat as possible. One of the biggest clues to watch for is the glue easing out of the end. Oops, too hot. See, I actually got that one a little too hot, but that's okay. Then on the tiny one, I try and give it an extra little squeeze before the glue gets cold, so it makes a good grip on the wire. Your wiring harness. It's always better to cut electrical tape than tear it. All the extra wires that are left behind, I also use that for kind of a strengthening the harness up. At this point in time, I don't know if I'm going to be changing anything, so at least I know it's there. And there you go. There's your harness. All of these wires get taped up together. All the extra wires get taped up together. I missed one originally, so, but that's your harness to the VESC control module. This is the factory wires you cut off the motor. The wires are 8 gauge. They have an extra insulator on them for abrasion wear, as you'll find when you cut the insulation off. And you're just doing everything on a much larger scale. And then you use the larger crimp sections for the 8 gauge. It actually shows you the 8 gauge connector. Doing the same thing, sticking the wire in there, crimping it down. Heat shrinking it up. When you do the wiring for the motor, this is the controller layout. The bottom wire here is the green wire, the middle is yellow, and the top one is blue. This kind of sets the direction of the motor. If you get any two of these swapped, the motor will run in the opposite direction. And then that's all your wiring for your control module. Waterproofing the Flipsky VESC. When removing the cover, the screws are T8 or 5/64 Allen wrench. I'm not going to seal all the way around the case, at least internally. I am going to seal around each one of the little connectors here, also around the 3-phase wires. There's heat sink grease inside the controller. If you decide to remove some of it, it's very messy, so be prepared for that. I got it all over me. This is the silicone sealer that I'm using. Nothing special about it, but it has been used in other batteries and stuff that I've looked at. Is what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it around each one of the connectors and in between each one. As you see here, just cut a little tiny bit of the tip off. Here I'm squeezing it out, I should have done in between the connectors first, but that's it. Here's the second time, and yes, I am doing it between the connectors first. Does a much better job of getting in between them. Just go around each connector. I gotta use a little screwdriver to clean up anything that I got inside the connectors. And this is the last set of connectors that I've got to seal up. I'm taking my time. It looks pretty shaky from here, but I've got it magnified and slowed down a little bit so you can see what's actually going on. The silicone won't affect the electronics that it sticks to. Then get the cover, align the power leads and the antenna lead if yours has one. Make sure they're all in position. And then put the cover back on. Reinstall the screws. Hey, I can do that really fast if I want to. Anyhow, take a look, make sure that everything's sealed up good. Then add sealer around the antenna wire and both the power and ground leads. It doesn't have to be pretty, it's just got to be sealed up good. Yep, all done. That's it. The silicone will harden in 24 hours, so just let it sit. I forgot to add the silicone to the phase wire, so I'm just putting it like 3/4 of the way around. And that's it. I'm done. Okay. This is what the module is going to kind of look like when you're done wiring it. You see I've spliced the two red and black wires onto the red and black one. And then there's 3 large wires. This first one over here on this side is going to be the green one. The middle one is going to be yellow. And this one, the other side, is going to be blue. If you change the position of any of these 2 wires, the motor will run in reverse. But in the programming, you can fix that also. So it doesn't really matter which way these wires go, but this way is the right way. Here's my mower connector. All the wires that I didn't use, I just kind of taped off in a big tag. And then this is all my splices for my other 4 wires in another video. This connector here is for the USB. This is for programming. On this one, I've got the Pro version 2 to program it and change settings. For changing settings, Bluetooth is the way to go. This other connector here, the Pro version 2, also has an on-off switch for the module. I'm just going to mount that probably in the side of the charging port somewhere. When I was doing my testing, I just left it on all the time, and just turned the key on and off as needed. You really don't need to use the switch. If you want an extra security, yeah, you can hide the switch and turn the module on and off that way also. Installing the module. At first, this is what I've done. I've got a number 30 hose clamp. Run the wires through the clamp. So install the module right about in the middle of the hose clamp and tighten it up. Here's the side view of how it looks mounted. Pretty simple. Then you connect your red and black wires. Tape them up around the cut. Make sure all the wires are situated properly. So you don't get any binding or cut wires. Drop the 3 motor wires down where they can be connected in a minute. And take these wires here and this wire here and tape and tie wrap them. You can add another tie wrap for extra holding. The USB wire and switch wire, I tie wrapped it onto this bar here out of the way so when the battery is slid in, those wires won't get caught. Again, this is what the installation looks like. There's the location of the 2 ties. The next thing to do is connect your motor wires. Connect your 3 motor wires and tape those up also. Resecure the motor wires to the chassis. Also inspect that the small wires have plenty of free play going to the module. At this point, after everything's ready to go, you can see the alignment of the battery tray, and there's where the battery goes, and there's no wire is going to rub on the battery or anything else. Reinstall your batteries, and then it's on to programming. Welcome to my VESC setup procedure for Ryobi 480E riding mowers. Remember to update firmware before starting. Remember to support the rear wheels off the ground before performing this setup. Press motor setup wizard. Load default parameters no. Set battery type to lithium iron, cells to 16, capacity to 100 amp hours. Set the wheel diameter to 378 millimeters. Set the motor phase poles at 14 for this motor. Set the axle ratio, 5 for the small number and 52 for the big number. That'll equal 10.4 gear ratio. Click Run Detector and click OK. This cycles the motor to determine specs. I have tested this with and without Hall sensors with no difference in performance. Without Hall sensors, this reduces wiring needed and future failure points. Motor current is maximum phase amp safe for your motor. Click OK. Test forward and reverse operation of the wheels. If they need to be changed, click invert. Now run the setup input wizard. Click next. And click on the ADC input for e-bikes. Next. Press and release the throttle pedal. Go to Control Type, drop-down menu, set current reverse button brake center. Finish. Now go to Motor Settings, General, and then Current. Read the box. Set the motor current max at 100. The regen at 40. Drop down to the battery limits. My battery is 100 amp hours. So you set the maximum current at 100 and the maximum regen at 100. Click on the Motor Config button. Click Voltage tab. Those are okay. Click RPM tab. Set maximum reverse RPM at 4,000. This will set the reverse speed. click the config button. App to use drop down. Click on ADC. Then go to the app config button and click it. Go to current reverse button, brake center, and verify it. Go to mapping. In the mapping section, you're going to want to change the center to 0.05 volt above the low voltage. So in this case, it'll be 0.095. Go to the app config button and verify it, click it, and everything's done. If you want to change the throttle curve, you can on this setting. If you lower it like is shown, the mower will start off a little, the throttle will start off a little slower and increase proportionally. Again, you have to click the app config button if you change that. Go back to the main screen, the welcomes and wizards. Turn on the real-time data button. And you should be able to try forward and reverse on your mower. As you can see here, I'm applying forward and reverse. And it'll show you your speed and other information. You can also drag this menu and you'll have a digital, you'll have another reading that you can see all types of settings, and you can reset it for each trip. Going over to data analysis, real-time data. This is a graph of the mower operating. It's more informational than anything, but it does show you your ERPM. And that's the setup of your mower. You should be able to take it off the jack stands and go drive it at this point. Thanks for watching my video. Visit my Facebook group, Ryobi 48 volt riding mowers.